All right, 23 minutes after 9 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. It's amazing how much our lives have been changed by technology in the past few years. I mean, if you can imagine what life was like before a telephone. The whole world has changed so much. And then when we started getting things like video cameras and regular cameras and audio recorders and computers and the internet and everything else, and now it's all in one phone. And we do those things in the form of what we call apps, short for applications. And I know you don't need me to tell you that. But it's part of our life. And there's a new study that examines attitudes, behavior, and experiencing involving apps and the impact that apps are having on our lives and on our security. To tell us what this study indicates, Neil Wu Becker is going to help us out. He is a technology expert. It's an honor to have him on our show. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning. How are you today?
We're okay. Where are you calling from?
Calling from San Jose, California, not too far from you.
Hey, so who did you study? Who was the study? Did it study average people or people like in the military, or who did it study?
Yeah, we looked at over 2,000 people around the world in 10 countries, the United States being one of the 10, and we were looking at employees, essentially, people like you and me who have to go to the office every day, and we interact with applications that are both personal and work-related on devices like you were saying. So it's really more of a workforce study, but because we live such blended lives, both as consumers and employees during our waking hours, the applications that we use are kind of leading that blended life for us because we commingle that on our phones and our laptops. That's what we focused on.
And how? In what way does it affect us? And how does it affect our health and our security?
Yeah, well, let's start with just the importance. Health was interesting because that's actually a good segue. One of the things we found, what we wanted to baseline at first was just how important our applications to us. And 86%, that's more than 8 out of 10 people globally, including those in the U.S., basically said, I cannot live without apps. They're that important to me. They're fundamentally ingrained in my lifestyle, and that I would feel physically uncomfortable or struggle to get through my daily life without them. So that's a strong statement when you say, I cannot live without my apps. So we put it to the test, and we said, well, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And 50% said, I consider an application, and especially an important one in my life, whether it be a work or a business or a personal one, to be as important or close to the importance of basic necessities of life like eating, drinking, and breathing. That to us was startling in terms of how important applications truly are in our lives.
Do we have enough information to understand why? I mean, why are those apps that important? I'm trying to think if I have. I don't think that's true for me. Of course, maybe because I'm older. I don't know.
Well, might be part of the 14% per se. I think it's safe to say that if you think about, let's just take your smartphone, for example, not even a laptop or a tablet. How many applications do you have on it that you've downloaded? How many are you a power user of? So for me, for example, I've had about 50 apps on my phone, but I'm a power user of about 6 to 7 of them every single day. And then you think about how many more you're going to use, say, by the end of the decade, and how many you used maybe a couple years ago, that number is going to spike northbound considerably, is what you would argue. Because there's an app for everything, for work and for personal lifestyles. So when you start thinking about how much we're using apps and texting and emailing and interacting through social media applications or business applications as well, there's a cause and effect relationship about how important and how ingrained they become in conducting operationally, if you will, our daily lives and our lifestyles.
Okay, so if I was to say, okay, I use a couple of news apps instead of a newspaper. I have a couple of communication apps instead of the phone, or oh gosh, I don't know, or writing a letter through regular mail. So if I went back to the old way of doing things, let me ask it this way: if I compare the old way of doing things to the new way, does having an app in some way make it more critical for me than like reading a newspaper?
And it's all a matter of personal choice, ultimately. I also read the newspaper too, but I also have news apps. It all depends on where you are at your point in time in life. For example, I have a commute that's approximately an hour in the car, so I'm not going to be able to read a newspaper. But when I'm at a stop sign, maybe I'm going to be able to check a quick weather app or a sports score, or check my banking account, or even an email or two from work. So the convenience of when you use, say, a physical or an old school or traditional type of medium for communications or information versus maybe this new world order of being very app-driven. It just depends on where you are at your point in time in your daily regimen, I would argue.
Well, many parents have apps to tell them where their children are.
Indeed, yeah. Whether the kids like that or not, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
So I guess I can see it this way: that if I use my app instead of my newspaper, nobody can steal my identity if I'm holding a newspaper in my hand. But if I'm reading the New York Times on my phone, then maybe I can have my identity hacked into.
It's funny you say that because I get frustrated personally just as an individual, regardless of who I work for or what have you. If you think about the number of passwords you have for just your apps, don't even worry about websites. Now you start talking about web-based apps on laptops and your mobile phones as well. But just the apps on your phone, how many music apps you have, news apps, all that. And the passwords you use, what we're finding in the study is the majority of people are getting so overwhelmed with the number of apps and passwords that they have to remember that they use the same one for everything, which actually is not necessarily a behavioral best practice.
Yeah.
If I hack one, I get your whole house.
Yeah.
So basically, there are concerns about from a best practice. Security is not necessarily the easiest thing to do from a behavioral standpoint, but you kind of have to. It's like working out if you want to stay healthy from an online standpoint, online hygiene standpoint.
All right.
It does present issues.
That's enough information to make us want to know more. So give us a website so we can look into this.
Yeah, you can download the report and find out more at A10networks.com. That's A10networks.com, and the report is free.
Okay, A10networks.com. We'll make sure there's a link on this podcast after it's up there on the internet. Right now, we're live, of course, but we do a podcast of each live show later on in the day. Neil Wu Becker, thank you so much for taking time to speak to us today.
You bet. Have a safe day. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We will be right back.
Soldiers are being deployed to support police.
Police have arrested 4 men in connection with that attack that killed 22. And jury selection continues in Pittsburgh today in Bill Cosby's sexual assault trial. 11 jurors seated so far. Only 1 is African American.
Prosecutors say race was not a factor in their decision to strike 2 black women from the jury panel, and Cosby's lawyers have cried foul over it.
Fox's Tanya J. Powers. Fox News. We report. You decide.